When Private Elvis Presley walked into that small house party in Bad Nauheim, Germany, on September 13th, 1959, he was just looking for a distraction from the loneliness of military life. What he found instead was a 14-year-old girl with dark hair and striking eyes who would change the course of his entire life. By the end of that evening, Elvis would make a decision that would haunt him for decades. A decision between what his heart wanted and what the world would accept. But nobody at that party knew yet that this wasn't a love story. It was the beginning of a tragedy that would take 17 years to fully unfold. Bad Nauheim, Germany. September 1959. The small town had become an unlikely hub of American military presence during the Cold War. Thousands of young American soldiers were stationed there, far from home, living in a strange land where they didn't speak the language and didn't understand the culture. For most of them, it was just a duty to fulfill. But for one soldier, it was supposed to be an escape. Elvis Aaron Presley, 24 years old, the biggest rock and roll star in the world, had been drafted into the United States Army in March 1958. He could have taken the easy route. The Army offered him the chance to join Special Services, to entertain troops, to basically continue his career in uniform. But Elvis refused. He wanted to serve like everyone else. He wanted to prove he wasn't just a pretty face or a spoiled celebrity. He wanted to be normal, or at least as normal as Elvis Presley could ever be. But normal was harder than he'd imagined. His mother, Gladys, had died just months after he'd been drafted. The grief was still raw, still crushing. He'd wake up in the middle of the night in his rented house off base, forgetting for a moment that she was gone, reaching for the phone to call her before reality crashed back in. The loneliness was unbearable. The other soldiers tried to include him, tried to treat him like one of the guys, but there was always that wall, that invisible barrier between Elvis Presley the icon and Elvis Presley the man. So when his friend Curry Grant invited him to a small party at the house of another Air Force officer, Elvis said yes. Not because he wanted to party. He hadn't felt like celebrating anything since his mama died. But because anything was better than sitting alone in that empty house, drowning in memories and grief. The party was at the home of Captain Joseph Beaulieu, an Air Force officer stationed at Wiesbaden Air Base. It was a modest gathering, maybe 20 people, mostly military personnel and their families. Music playing on a record player, people drinking beer and talking about football and how much they missed American food. Normal, boring, exactly what Elvis needed. He arrived around 8 p.m., wearing his civilian clothes, dark pants, a light blue shirt, nothing flashy. His friend Curry made the introductions. Captain Beaulieu and his wife were polite, but clearly starstruck. Their kids were wide-eyed. And then Elvis saw her. She was sitting on the couch in the living room, wearing a blue and white sailor dress with her dark hair styled in a way that made her look older than she was. She had this quiet confidence about her, this stillness in a room full of noise. When their eyes met, she didn't squeal or faint or ask for an autograph like most girls did. She just looked at him with this calm, appraising gaze, like she was trying to figure out if he was real or just another soldier playing dress-up. Elvis walked over. "Hi there, I'm Elvis," she smiled slightly. "I know who you are. I'm Priscilla. Priscilla Beaulieu. You Captain Beaulieu's daughter?" "Stepdaughter." "But yes." Elvis sat down next to her, and for the first time in months, he felt something other than grief. Curiosity, interest, connection. "You like living in Germany?" Priscilla shrugged. "It's okay. Different from Texas, where we were before. But I'm getting used to it." They talked, and talked, and talked. About music. She loved his songs, especially Love Me Tender. About movies. She'd seen all his films. About family. Her real father was in the Navy. Her stepfather was strict but fair. About school. She was in 9th grade at an American school on base. About loneliness. She missed her friends back in the States. felt like an outsider here. Elvis found himself opening up in ways he hadn't with anyone since his mother died. He told her about Gladys, about how much he missed her, about how the grief felt like a physical weight on his chest that never went away. Priscilla listened without judgment, without that pity he saw in everyone else's eyes. She just listened, really listened, and when she reached out and gently touched his hand, Elvis felt something crack open inside him. But here's what nobody knew yet, and what would make this night so devastating in hindsight. Elvis already knew this was wrong. He already knew that a 24-year-old man shouldn't be feeling this way about a 14-year-old girl. But in that moment, drowning in grief and loneliness, he convinced himself it was innocent, that she was mature for her age, that they were just talking, that nothing would happen. The party continued around them, but Elvis and Priscilla were in their own world. Hours passed. At some point, someone asked Elvis to play the piano. He did, singing a few songs, and Priscilla watched him with those dark, steady eyes, and Elvis felt seen in a way he hadn't felt since his mother died. Around midnight, Captain Beaulieu approached them. "Priscilla, it's late. You have school tomorrow." Elvis stood up immediately, respectful. "Sir, I apologize. I didn't mean to keep her up so late." "It's all right, son. But she does need to get to bed." Elvis looked at Priscilla. Can I see you again?" Priscilla glanced at her stepfather, then back at Elvis. "I'd like that." Captain Beaulieu frowned. "Now wait just a minute." "Sir," Elvis interrupted gently, "I promise you, my intentions are honorable. I'd like to get to know your daughter better. With your permission, of course, and with you and Mrs. Beaulieu present, if that's what you prefer." There was something in Elvis's voice, a genuine respect, a vulnerability, that made the captain pause. He studied Elvis for a long moment, then sighed. "All right, but she's 14 years old, Presley. You remember that?" "Yes, sir, I remember." And that's when everything changed. Because what started as a chance meeting at a party was about to become an obsession that would consume both of them and ultimately destroy the very thing they were trying to build. Over the next several months, Elvis saw Priscilla as often as he could, always with her parents present at first. He'd come to their house, sit in the living room, talk to the whole family. He was charming, respectful, attentive. He brought gifts, records, small jewelry, nothing too extravagant. He asked about Priscilla's schoolwork, encouraged her to study hard, told her education was important. But slowly, gradually, the boundaries started to shift. The visits became more frequent. The conversations became more intimate. Elvis started calling her every night before she went to bed. He started taking her out, to restaurants, to movies, always with her parents' permission, always back before curfew. But still, the relationship was deepening in ways that made everyone around them uncomfortable, but nobody seemed willing to stop. Priscilla's parents were torn. On one hand, their daughter was dating Elvis Presley, the biggest star in the world. On the other hand, she was 14 and he was 24. They set strict rules: no being alone together, no physical contact beyond holding hands, always home by 10 o'clock. Elvis agreed to everything. He was the perfect gentleman. At least that's what everyone saw. But wait, you haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. Because what was really happening behind closed doors would reveal a manipulation so subtle, so calculated, that Priscilla herself wouldn't recognize it until decades later. Elvis was molding her, shaping her, creating the perfect woman from a malleable teenager. He told her how to dress, more mature, more sophisticated, less like a schoolgirl. He told her how to do her makeup, darker eyes, redder lips, more dramatic. He told her what music to listen to, what movies to watch, what books to read. And Priscilla, desperate for love and attention, desperate to keep the most famous man in the world interested in her, complied with everything. Her friends at school started to notice the changes. "You're different," they'd say. "You don't act like yourself anymore." But Priscilla didn't care. She was Elvis Presley's girlfriend. She was special. She was chosen. What did it matter if she had to change a little bit to keep him interested? Elvis's friends were more direct. Red West, one of his closest companions, pulled him aside one night. "Boss, you gotta be careful with this girl. She's a kid. People are starting to talk." "She's not a kid," Elvis shot back. "She's mature for her age. She understands me in ways nobody else does." "She's 14, Elvis. 14. Do you understand what could happen if this goes wrong? Your career would be over. You could go to jail." "Nothing's going to go wrong," Elvis said coldly. "We're just friends. That's all anyone needs to know." But they weren't just friends. Elvis knew it. Priscilla knew it. And deep down, her parents knew it too. But they were too starstruck, too flattered by Elvis's attention to their family, to put a stop to it. The months passed. Elvis's time in Germany was coming to an end. In March 1960, he'd be discharged and sent back to the States. Back to his career, his fame, his life as Elvis Presley. And that meant leaving Priscilla behind. The thought terrified both of them. Priscilla, because she was convinced she'd never find anyone who understood her like Elvis did. Elvis, because Priscilla had become his lifeline, his connection to something real and pure in a world that felt increasingly fake and corrupted. One night in February 1960, a few weeks before Elvis's discharge, he took Priscilla to his rented house. Her parents had reluctantly agreed, trusting Elvis's promise that nothing inappropriate would happen. And technically, he kept that promise. But what happened that night would set the stage for everything that followed. They sat in his living room, the record player spinning slow songs, and Elvis told Priscilla his plan. "I want you to come to America. When you're older, when you're ready. I want you to finish school, and then I want you to come live at Graceland." Priscilla's eyes widened. "Live with you?" "With me and my family. My grandmother, my father, my friends. You'd have your own room. You'd be safe. And we could see where this goes. See if what we have is real." "It is real," Priscilla said immediately. "I love you." The words hung in the air. Elvis looked at this 14-year-old girl who'd just declared her love for him, and he felt a mix of emotions so complex he couldn't untangle them. Love? Maybe. Obsession? Definitely. Guilt? Absolutely. But also relief, because Priscilla loved him. Not Elvis Presley the star, not Elvis Presley the icon, just him, the lonely, grieving, desperate man underneath all the fame. "I love you too," he said. And he meant it. Or at least, he meant the version of love he was capable of in that moment. They kissed, not for the first time. There had been stolen kisses before, quick pecks when her parents weren't looking. But this was different. This was deeper, more intense, more adult. And when they finally pulled apart, both of them knew that a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. But what you're seeing now is just the beginning. Because what happened over the next 7 years would transform a teenage girl into Elvis's ideal woman and ultimately destroy both of them in the process. Elvis left Germany in March 1960. The goodbye was tearful. Priscilla cried for days afterward, convinced she'd never see him again. But Elvis kept his promise. He called, he wrote letters, he sent gifts, and slowly, carefully, he kept her tethered to him across an ocean and thousands of miles. Priscilla finished 9th grade, then 10th, then 11th. The whole time, Elvis was there, a constant presence in her life even though he was physically absent. He'd call her every night, sometimes for hours. He'd tell her about his movies, his music, his life in Memphis, and always, always, he'd remind her, "You're mine, Priscilla. Don't forget that. You're mine." When Priscilla was 16, Elvis convinced her parents to let her visit Graceland for Christmas. 2 weeks in Memphis, staying in the guest house, chaperoned by Elvis's grandmother. Her parents agreed, still trusting Elvis's promises that he would be a gentleman. He wasn't. Not entirely. There was no sex. Elvis had his own complicated issues around that. His own Madonna whore complex that made him reluctant to ruin Priscilla. But there was everything else. Heavy petting, making out, Elvis pushing boundaries, testing limits, seeing how far he could go before Priscilla said, "Stop." And Priscilla never said stop. She was too afraid of losing him. When she went back to Germany, she was different. More withdrawn, more secretive. Her grades started slipping. She stopped hanging out with friends her own age. Her whole world had narrowed to one singular focus: Elvis. Her parents finally started to worry. "This isn't healthy," her mother said. "She's obsessed with him. She's not living her own life." But what could they do? Elvis was Elvis. He was charming, persuasive, insistent. And Priscilla was 17 now, almost 18, practically an adult. If they tried to keep her from him, she'd just rebel and run away. At least if they maintained some control, they could monitor the situation. Hold on. Don't miss this crucial detail. Because in 1962, Elvis made a proposal that would seal Priscilla's fate and set in motion the tragedy that everyone could see coming, except the two people at the center of it. "Let her come live at Graceland," Elvis told Captain Beaulieu over the phone. "She can finish her senior year at an all-girls Catholic school in Memphis. She'll be chaperoned at all times. She'll have her own room, and when she graduates, if we're still together, maybe we can talk about marriage." It was an insane proposal. A 17-year-old girl moving across the world to live in the house of a 27-year-old man she wasn't related to or engaged to. In 1962, this was scandalous, potentially career-ending for Elvis if the press found out, potentially life-ruining for Priscilla if things went wrong, but Elvis was persuasive. He painted a picture of a respectable arrangement: separate bedrooms, parental oversight, education as the priority. He swore on his mother's grave that he would take care of Priscilla, that he would protect her, that he would do right by her. And incredibly, impossibly, Captain and Mrs. Beaulieu agreed. In March 1963, 17-year-old Priscilla Beaulieu moved into Graceland. Her life as she knew it was over. Her transformation into Elvis's creation was complete. For the first few months, Elvis kept his promise. Sort of. Priscilla had her own room. She attended school. There were chaperones. But the boundaries were fuzzy. Elvis would come to her room late at night to talk. They'd fall asleep together in his bed, fully clothed, and wake up before anyone noticed. They'd take trips together, to Las Vegas, to Los Angeles, always with members of the Memphis Mafia along, always with plausible deniability, but everyone knew what was really happening. Priscilla graduated high school in 1964. She was 19. Elvis was 29, and the question hung in the air. What now? Elvis's friends and family expected an engagement announcement. Priscilla certainly expected it, but Elvis hesitated. He loved Priscilla, or his version of love, which was possessive and controlling but genuine in its own twisted way. But he also loved his freedom. He loved the ability to see other women when he was filming movies. He loved the fantasy that he was still young and wild and free. Marriage felt like the end of something, the final nail in the coffin of his youth. So he stalled, and stalled, and stalled. For 3 more years, Priscilla lived at Graceland in this strange limbo. Not quite a wife, not quite a girlfriend, not quite a daughter, but some uncomfortable combination of all three. She redecorated his house, she managed his household staff. She accompanied him to events when he wanted her there, and stayed home when he didn't. She became exactly what he'd molded her to be, the perfect accessory to his life. But she wasn't happy. How could she be? She'd given up her entire adolescence, her entire identity, to become Elvis's ideal woman. And he still wouldn't marry her. He still wouldn't commit. He still wouldn't make her feel like she was more than just another possession in his collection. "You won't believe this," But it would take a threat of loss, the very real possibility that Priscilla would leave him, to finally push Elvis to make a decision he should have made years earlier. In late 1966, Priscilla had a moment of clarity. She was 21 years old. She'd spent 7 years of her life waiting for Elvis. 7 years of being molded and shaped and controlled. And what did she have to show for it? No ring, no commitment, no life of her own, just a bedroom at Graceland, and a man who loved her when it was convenient and ignored her when it wasn't. She told him she was leaving, going back to her parents, starting over, finding herself. Elvis panicked. The idea of losing Priscilla, losing the one person who'd been constant through all the chaos of his fame, was unbearable. Within days, he proposed. Not with romance or grand gestures, but with desperation and fear. "Marry me," he said, "please. I need you." And Priscilla, still so young, still so molded by him, still so desperate for his love, said yes. They got married on May 1st, 1967. In Las Vegas. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends. The press went wild. Elvis gets married. The world celebrated. Another fairy tale come true. But it wasn't a fairy tale. It was a tragedy that was only just beginning its final act. The marriage lasted 5 years. 5 painful, complicated, heartbreaking years. They had a daughter, Lisa Marie, born exactly 9 months after the wedding. For a brief moment, it seemed like maybe things would work. Maybe the family unit would give Elvis the stability he craved. Maybe Priscilla would finally feel fulfilled. But Elvis was Elvis. He couldn't be faithful. He couldn't be present. He couldn't be the husband Priscilla needed. And Priscilla was starting to wake up from the spell she'd been under since she was 14. She was starting to realize that she'd never had a chance to figure out who she was outside of being Elvis's wife. She'd never had a chance to be young, to make mistakes, to grow into herself. She'd gone from child to Elvis's creation, to wife and mother without ever just being Priscilla. In 1972, she told him she was leaving. For real this time. No threats, no negotiations, just done. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "I don't even know who I am. I need to find out." Elvis was devastated. He begged her to stay, promised to change, promised to be better. But they both knew it was too late. The damage was done. The girl he'd met at 14 and molded into his ideal woman was finally breaking free, and there was nothing he could do to stop her. The divorce was finalized in October 1973. Priscilla got custody of Lisa Marie. Elvis got visitation rights, and both of them got a chance to finally be free of each other. But here's the heartbreaking truth. Neither of them ever really was free. Elvis spent the last 4 years of his life struggling with addiction, depression, and the weight of his own fame. He dated other women, but none of them were Priscilla. None of them understood him the way she did. None of them had been shaped by him from adolescence into adulthood. He'd lost the one person he'd created to be perfect for him, and he never recovered. And Priscilla? She spent decades trying to figure out who she was outside of being Elvis's wife. She became an actress, a businesswoman, a mother. She preserved his legacy, turned Graceland into a museum, kept his memory alive. But in interviews, when asked about their relationship, she always had this look in her eyes, this complicated mix of love and resentment and loss. "I was 14 when I met him," she'd say. 14. I didn't know who I was. I didn't have a chance to find out. He became my whole world. And when that world fell apart, I had to start from scratch. At 30, I had to learn how to be myself at an age when most people already know who they are. Years later, in her memoir, Priscilla would write about that first night in Bad Nauheim, about the 14-year-old girl in the blue and white sailor dress who met the most famous man in the world and thought it was fate. She'd write about how naive she was, how vulnerable, how easy it was for Elvis to shape her into what he wanted, because she didn't have a strong enough sense of self to resist. but she'd also write about the good parts. The real connection they had, the way Elvis opened up to her about his grief over his mother, the way he made her feel special and seen and important, the way he loved her in his broken, complicated way. Because it was love, twisted and unhealthy and ultimately destructive, but love nonetheless. Elvis died on August 16, 1977. He was 42 years old. Priscilla was 32. They'd been divorced for 4 years, but when she got the call that he was gone, she collapsed. Because despite everything, despite the manipulation, the control, the years of her life stolen, she loved him, and a part of her always would. At his funeral, she stood next to Lisa Marie, their daughter, and looked at Elvis in his coffin. He looked peaceful, finally at rest, finally free from the demons that had haunted him his whole adult life. And Priscilla thought about that night in Bad Nauheim, about the girl she'd been, about the woman she'd become, about the decades-long journey from innocence to experience, from creation to creator of her own life. "Goodbye, Elvis," she whispered. "Thank you for everything. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I couldn't be what you needed. I'm sorry we couldn't make it work." But mostly, she was sorry for the 14-year-old girl who'd walked into that party and walked out forever, changed. The girl who'd given up her adolescence, her identity, her chance at a normal life, all for a love that was never quite real. That was always more about what Elvis needed than what she needed. That was always destined to end in heartbreak. That's the story of Elvis and Priscilla. Not a romance, not a fairy tale, but a tragedy. A cautionary tale about fame and power and the damage we can do to each other when we're drowning in our own pain and looking for someone to save us. Priscilla survived it, built a life for herself, became her own person, finally, decades after she should have had the chance. But the scars remained. The lost years? The stolen adolescence. The girl who never got to just be a girl. And Elvis? He got exactly what he wanted. A woman molded perfectly to his needs. But in getting it, he lost the one thing that might have actually saved him. A real, equal partnership with someone who loved him for who he was, not who he'd trained her to think he was. They met when she was 14 and he was 24. They married when she was 21 and he was 31. They divorced when she was 26 and he was 36. And he died when she was 32 and he was 42. 17 years. From that first meeting to his death. 17 years of complicated, messy, beautiful, terrible love. 17 years that shaped both of their lives and haunted both of them until the very end. That's the night Elvis met Priscilla. But really, it's the story of what happens when a lonely, grieving man meets a vulnerable, impressionable girl and convinces both of them that what they're building is love, when really, it's just two broken people trying desperately not to drown alone. Tell us in the comments, do you think their relationship was love or manipulation? Should there be age limits on relationships regardless of maturity? Can you ever truly recover from giving up your identity for someone else? Let us know what city you're watching from today. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional and untold stories of Elvis Presley, the human side of legends, and the relationships that shaped and scarred them. Hit the bell to never miss a story that matters.